Thank you. That film was pregnant with meaning, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we could take from this. Where to start? Where to go? When I watched that, one of the things that struck me was just the therapeutic nature of all those relationships and things. I mean, there's an AI component, but to me that pales in comparison to all the relationships and things. So today we're going to talk about why do we do what we do? Because I think everybody would admit those characters made some interesting choices along the way. So, maybe?
Something not switching.
See if you can help me out here.
Okay, I'll go up and you signal.
Yeah, I'll just, sure.
And I'll go.
See, sometimes technology does fail us.
Oh, hey, all right, we got it. Oh, the intro button, that's the one I need. Okay. All right. There's 6 buttons and I picked the wrong one. Or not even that, there's 3 on the front. So yeah, I'm not doing very good right now. So why do we do what we do? Okay. So we're going to talk real quickly about these things, and then we're going to have a lot of discussion at the end, I would imagine. So there was obviously some relationship issues that were going on for these folks that was bigger than just the snapshot we got of their lives. So first thing we're going to look at is how does early development shape our brains, right? Once we get past that, we're going to talk about, well, how does our brain develop and influence our relationships, right? That's a big thing. We're all in relationships. You can't not be in relationships. How does our brain affect that? And the nice thing is, number 3 is we're not totally bound by our early relationships and those instances that have happened that have shaped how our brain is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, got to have a cute baby after that movie, right? Everybody ooh and ah for a second about the baby. There you go, exactly. So, one of the things that has been really cool over the last decade, if you guys have read much about infant development or brain plasticity or any of that kind of stuff, is that we have always kind of known it clinically, but now we're getting a lot more great data about how that mother-child, parent-child relationship affects our brain, okay? Babies are born to relate. How many of you guys have held a baby? Right? Even if you're anti-baby or just neutral baby, right? I mean, they pull for you to do this with them, right? I mean, it's kind of like that puppy in the movie. You can't not want to hold it, right? And the reason they do that is, 1, for survival, but 2 is interactions is how the baby grows its brain, makes those neural connections. Okay? It needs to do that. It needs to organize those things. So it's doing that right away. And we know that one of the ways that happens is what we call the serve and return. Anybody play tennis or know enough about tennis, right? One person serves it, you hit it back, right? Okay. Well, this happens in mother-baby, right? This is going on right here. Baby does something, mom goes, ooh, right, back, and it goes back and forth. And this back and forth of attunement triggers a response in the baby. It triggers a physiological response, which triggers a biochemical response. And this biochemical response causes brain development, brain growth, okay? So, over time, these relationships and these experiences build on each other, okay? And they build these connections. These are neurons we got here, right? Not just freaky spider webs, but we got these neurons. And as these experiences happen, the ones that happen a lot, they build these connections, strong connections, okay? When we have experiences that don't happen as often, what do you think happens with those connections? they die off. And at a certain, when we're really little, less than a year old, we have all these connections that are being made. And then eventually our brain says, we can't handle all that. We're going to do a little pruning, and that's what we see happening right there. Is some of that stuff. But the things we get regularly build up strong, right? And they get to be pretty fast that way, all right? So attunement causes this, okay? And the pleasurable interactions are causing those positive neural networks to be created. And when they don't happen, and it's much more a stressful environment, we see less volume in the brain. Okay? One interesting thing is we have something called the orbital frontal cortex, right behind our eyeballs, right? Okay? And it is responsible for this attunement, this back and forth that we have. Okay? We found some cool stuff about it is, unlike a lot of other brain structures that are kind of predetermined from the get-go, you know, due to genetics and heredity, you know, maybe you're really smart, and so, hey, guess what? Your kiddos are going to be pretty smart. There's a good chance of that, right? Well, the orbital frontal cortex doesn't have any of that. It's like fair game. It's all about your interactions and relationships. And so it's huge in this process, because if we don't have that, then that shrinks. We don't get the volume. We don't get the neural connections within that and between that. So then guess what that means?
Not smart.
We're not as smart, but especially we're not relationally smart, right? I can't figure out how to attune to you, you know? and we're seeing how big of a deal that is. Okay, so 6 to 12 months, you know, we're getting all this stuff happening, stuff for connecting, which is great. Then we get to 12 to 18 months, and we get this pictures start coming in our heads, right? And that's really important. And these things start to actually be encoded in our brain. And now our brain is making connections between the sensory part and some visual things. So we're starting to get some new highways going on, okay? Then we get to 2 years. Anybody remember what happens with kiddos at 2 years? Huh? No.
The word no is really good.
Well, there you go. They start to talk, right? So we get to 2 years, and we start getting some verbal information coming on. And that gets to be, as you guys know, just as powerful as any of the physical and visual sorts of things, because words have power, right? And they get infused with all this emotional stuff. So we've got emotional things, language stuff, emotion, all this stuff together, and pretty soon we've got all this connection, right? And that connection we kind of call brain architecture. If you looked at it, if you think about them like kind of like girders, right? I mean, the more girders we got holding up all sorts of stuff, the more secure it is, right? Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen, and we get some mental health issues and even some physical health issues. But but hopefully all those connections are going to make a big difference, because one of the connections that's really important is the connection between our left and our right hemisphere, okay? Anybody remember what the difference between those two is?
The right hemisphere is the female, the left is the male. And what you want to do in Kundalini yoga is you want to stimulate the Kundalini from the lower part of the pelvic area of the spine, get it to go up into the cerebral spinal fluid, get it to go into the right and the left sides of the brain, and then mentally you kind of put them together, and that's balanced. And most people don't function in a balanced way. Females are more apt to have balance of both the left and the right brain. The male is not, but there are techniques to
Well,
make it work.
that's one interpretation.
Emotional and
Well,
analytical.
Yeah, the very basic would be the left side is more logical, which, you know,
Oh, no, the right's more artistic.
yeah, it tends to be more emotional and things like that. So we got our logical, you know, verbal side. This is very simplistic. Right side is more emotional, okay? So the reason why we need this cross communication is, you know, it should be obvious for several reasons. But how many times have you guys been upset today? Anybody get upset today about anything? Right? Okay. I was going to say, you guys have all had good days. This is great. But how many times do you get upset and you say, John, calm down, right? It's not that big a deal. You know, the person will merge in front of me and I'll go, it'll be fine, right? Our emotional right hemisphere at that point borrows a little information from the left side and says, ooh, let's chill out a little bit, right? Okay? Now, how many of you are very wired on the left side and it'll just be like, well, it doesn't make any logical sense, honey. Why should you do that? Right? Anybody ever have experience like that? Okay, right? Sometimes you'd be like, gosh, I wish he could borrow a little bit from the right side and say, yes, I understand that, honey. That's okay that you're upset about that, right? So when we have that cross communication, we're able to do that. Okay, so that's really important for emotional, relational health. Okay, unfortunately, everybody's got stress, right? Stress happens, right? A moderate amount of stress is good. We need stress to be able to, we need to have stress to be able to learn how to deal with stress, okay? Unfortunately, we have some environmental stress that is we'd call toxic, right? We got some environmental things like poverty, abuse, trauma, all those things that are impinging upon that particular person, that particular brain, and they're causing problems, right? And the problem is, especially with kiddos, is they don't have the adult there to necessarily, modulate and moderate that for them. So they are just overwhelmed all the time in this fight or flight mode. And that, again, causes troubles with brain structure, okay? So as you can see from this top one, hey, it works, good. So you can see from this top one, we've got lots of connections, lots of branches coming out, right? When we look at somebody with some toxic stress, big difference, right? And this is in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, which the hippocampus is responsible for, it's got some long-term memory stuff, and it's got some emotional kind of things. So really important places in the brain that you do not want to be lacking in connections. Okay, but that's what toxic stress does. So, this is all fine and dandy, but how does this actually affect us, right, in our relationships? Well, let's take a look here at this real quick. Some people say our past doesn't affect us. Well, right, so we've got some things going on behind the scenes that affect us, okay? Now, all those brain structure things that we just talked about, like I mentioned before, we've known some of those things have been going on for a long time, okay? And we've, as psychologists, and specifically those of us who are psychoanalytically trained, we would call all these internalized relationships internal objects, which is a horrible name. I totally get it. I would have picked a different name, but that's what we call it. And basically what we mean is any relationship that we've had or any part of a person that we can remember, that's in there, right? Those are those connections we talked about. Those are in there. And we store them like crazy. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, right? Maybe you're a person who's had some bad experiences. Maybe you were bullied a lot, right? So maybe you carry around that sort of image of yourself as, a victim or less than, right? And then the corresponding other image would be of people as what? Dangerous, right? Can't be trusted, right? Maybe you come from an environment where your parents were fighting all the time, okay? So now you view relationships as unhelpful, right? Why would I want to be married? I saw what mom and dad did all the time. That's ridiculous. I don't want to sign up for that. And then, of course, then there's all the body image stuff that, gets thrown around that we're bombarded with all the time. And so those things are flying around. So we've got all these different internalized relationships in our head of us with other people, and these relationships affect us day to day. Our relationships, our old relationships, are constantly getting triggered because that's our framework, right? If we've had good, healthy relationships, we're going to tend to get with good, healthy people, okay? Because that works, right? When our brains aren't wired, in such a healthy way, we tend to find people who are not, what? Very healthy, and maybe not very healthy in the same, similar kind of ways, or maybe in a balancing kind of way. So, let's say this is Sally, okay? Sally's just a normal old person, right? And we'll say this is John, right? So they've all got their own issues, and I like to call it a tuning fork. Dr. Pulling, I used to call it, water glass, same thing, but couldn't find a good picture of water glass, so we're doing tuning fork. So everybody knows how a tuning fork works?
Sure.
Right, they all resonate at a certain frequency, right? So imagine all of our internal object relations are like tuning forks, okay? And they resonate. If we meet a similar person who's got similar sorts of issues or things that trigger our old relationships, right? In a good or bad way, guess what starts to happen with our tuning fork? It starts to resonate, right? Some of the time it resonates for good. You're like, oh man, I really like this person. I want to hang out with them. They're intoxicating, right? And other times you just meet somebody and you're like, oh dear Lord, that guy, I hate that guy, right? And it could be like that. But that tuning fork inside of you goes off instantly, right? Because those, we talked about all those connections that are being made, those are shortcuts that your brain makes. And they work, right? Sometimes they get us in trouble because they helped us survive back then, but maybe we don't need to survive like that now. But for a long time, they've worked. So, all right. So when we get good attunement when we're younger, that puts us in a better position to have good, healthy identities, right? So hopefully with this back and forth with parents, we realize, hey, maybe we're caring, maybe we're intelligent, maybe we got a spiritual side to us. Hey, maybe we experience ourselves as capable of being loved and loving, right? And driven. Maybe all these things relate, and there's some connection to it, right? Those are all good traits, right? Unfortunately, sometimes when we have trouble with that parent and child bond, we get some identity diffusion. We get some confusion about the messages we're receiving, right? Have you ever seen that sometimes when, somebody's upset, and it's always heartbreaking for me because I work with kids and I have my own kids, but when you see somebody relating to a kid and they're totally missing them. I mean, it's painful for an adult too, but it's really painful because the kid is just like, but it can lead to this. Oh, we get a good me. Hey, when I'm good when I'm caring, likable, smart, and pretty, right? But you know what? I'm also bad. When I'm, because I'm fat, right? Sometimes I get emotional, right? I'm listless. So therefore, I can't be loved, right? There's a part of me that's bad. And those two sides don't work well together. We've just got this vague awareness of these two parts of ourselves a lot of times because if we're wired like this, we don't have much of that left-right connection going in a healthy way. So whatever we're feeling, we tend to feel it intensely, and we tend to assume that is the truth, and we don't necessarily reflect on it. Right? So when you've had a good day, what do you feel? All good, right? When you've had a bad day, you're all bad, right? And you have some little awareness that these two parts of you exist, but holding them together is really tough. Okay? So this view of ourself influences how we view other people. Okay? Unfortunately, when your mirror is screwed up and you're looking at yourself and it's all distorted, you can't see anybody else realistically. because you're not seeing yourself realistically, right? And that's what's really sad. They're looking at the same mirror, but they're totally not realistic. So the good news is we're not totally bound by our early experiences. But, you know, just like if anybody's ever really remodeled a house, there's a lot of work that goes into that, right? It's not a weekend project, especially as I do projects. So one of the things I kind of like to talk about is the stages of competency. Anybody ever heard of these? You know what they are? Okay, so first off, we start off as unconsciously competent, okay? So that just means we have no clue why we stink, right? Why do all my relationships fail, right? I mean, I can go back from high school and they all stink. Why is that, right? A lot of people are stuck there in terms of relationships, but this could be any skill you're learning, really. Then, if we're lucky, we get to being consciously incompetent. Oh, yeah, now I know why I suck. Yeah, I'm a jerk, you know, and this is how I'm a jerk, right? I'm self-focused, you know, I have a hard time putting myself in other people's shoes, whatever, you know, I get it, okay?
Some people never get to number.
Some people never get to 2. Some people are very happy being 1. You know, it works for them. It's not uncomfortable enough for them. But some people get to 2, right? You know? Unfortunately, that's where some people stop, too. It's like, well, yeah, I've just come to accept that I'm a jerk, right? And I hope my wife, she can accept it, too. Then if we're lucky and we've worked hard, we get to consciously competent, okay? If I think really hard about it, I can be good. Okay, so Jeremy, don't say, you know, she looks ugly in that outfit. That's not good, right? You know, if I think hard about it, I can be successful. That takes a lot of work, okay? When I'm talking with people I work with, I always use the analogy of riding a bike, okay? So at this point, if we stop here, we're riding a bike like this. Left, right, you know, and we're barely keeping up. Is that a fun way to ride a bike? Yes, no, it is not. At least in my book, it's not, right? So, but a lot of times this is where, you know, we stop. Because you know what? It's sure a heck of a lot better than 1. You know, I know why I'm, you know, why I was doing stuff wrong, and now I'm doing a lot better. But the goal is to really get to being unconsciously competent, right? I don't even have to think about it, and I'm doing it well. You know, and some of us are lucky to be here out of the get-go because we've had great parenting and experiences and stuff that have helped us be there. Some of us are not. Some of us are bouncing around in here, okay? But the good news is we can get around that circle or that square if we want to. So how do we do that? Real quickly. Well, psychotherapy. Surprise, surprise, the psychologist talks about therapy, right? But it's true. You know, in my program, we had to do our own therapy. I did it for 2 years, lying on the couch. It was one of the best things I ever did. And I came from a pretty healthy family, I think. But it was awesome. I still learned a lot of stuff about myself, and there's still stuff I need to figure out. But that's one of the great things you can do. So there's individual, but also group. One of the things we do at the hospital are process groups. A lot of times when people think of group therapy, they think of, oh, this is a depression group. We're all going to sit around and talk about how depressed we are. Well, that doesn't really help with the type of problems we're talking about. Process group is where we get all sorts of people, and especially a heterogeneous group, so a bunch of people that are different. And the whole goal is to understand how we affect other people and how they affect us and learn about ourselves from regular people, you know? So, yeah, Jeremy, you are a jerk. Oh, gosh. Well, my wife says too, you know? Oh, okay, I guess there's something to it, you know? And you start to understand it that way. And then there's good old self-discovery, right? Sometimes, you know, we're in relationships all the time, but like a lot of the people in this movie, sometimes we like to put blinders on and not actually see what's happening. But if we could be open to that, we might learn some stuff just through that process. Journaling can be a good aspect to do that. Just learning to relate to yourself, right? It's one of the big things is talk about relationships with other people, but like we mentioned before, if we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, it's pretty tough. Spiritual direction is another great thing, depending on your faith tradition. There's some really good things you can do there. Talk about your relationship with your higher power. And then the question is, primes? I don't know. So, let's talk about the movie. Well, first off, any questions about that? That's a whole lot of information really fast. But, yeah.
I do. The part where you showed the baby and the neurons connecting or
Uh-huh.
synapses or whatever, and then damages or when they're not in a healthy environment or not getting nurtured.
Right.
How does that repair? Can that repair eventually, or does it stay damaged?
Well,
You know,
yeah, I mean, again, there's some things that are going to take a while to redo. You know, so, like, this is maybe a dumb example, but it just popped in my head, right? What street are we on right now? Santa Fe, right? Santa Fe Trail, right? It has not been used for, I don't know, how long?
Santa Fe, some years.
A long time, right? But you can still go in fields and see the tracks, right? That's kind of how some of our brain stuff works. What we're hoping to do is say, hey, let's not use this path as much. Let's try to move over here. And so it's more of let's create new pathways that is more helpful. And then pretty soon our brain just says, yeah, I don't need this as much,
okay.
right? And just slowly kind of starts to happen. Yeah, good question though. And it's cool because now we can say that's possible.
Right, right.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Is genetics a big factor in that development?
Well, this is the tricky part with some of these genetic questions. In some ways, yes, but what is the confound in those genetic issues is, or the confound in those genetic issues is, if you've got a family issue and they don't relate well to each other, what does it look like? It looks like hereditary stuff when it's really a relational thing. So that's what kind of complicates it sometimes. Makes it a little difficult with those things, but that's a good question.
What does prime mean in all this? I didn't understand the term.
Prime is just basically an AI person.
Oh, see, I'm very against artificial intelligence.
Well, there you go. So you would not order one for yourself.
I would not.
You would not be one of the
do
beta
that.
testers.
No.
Yeah.
I even gave up gave up the smartphone I had because too much going on.
There you
and
go.
those things.
That's right.
Got a cell phone, but
You'd be anti-pride. That's right.
yeah.
Dr. J, you had
I am.
Well, I am totally excited for this type of future, but, so we would be on different sides of that issue, but do you think that you talked about a spiritual kind of, you mentioned the term spiritual.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a spiritual aspect that is beyond brain function? In other words, when brain function stops, spiritual stops, or is this a life apart from the physical structure?
Oh, we're getting into like Plato and
Yeah,
dualism
exactly.
and all this fun philosophical kind. You know what? I don't have a clue. But
The answer is yes.
I think it's fascinating because, I mean, again, I think that's one of those things where I don't know if we'll ever know for sure. But you know, a lot of this stuff too is we didn't even know some of this brain stuff, even though we knew it at some level before. So it'll be interesting just to see where some of that stuff goes. But that's that's one of those big philosophical
What about the
questions.
question, do you have a soul?
Well, right, exactly. Yeah, or is that just a
That
bunch
to
of?
me keys everything.
Oh yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
I think one of the most hopeful things that recent developments in brain understanding is about the capacity to regenerate completely different pathways, to restore eyesight or restore all kinds of things along pathways that we didn't use before, or maybe never
Yeah.
had used in that manner, so that stroke victims or whatever, who in my youth were pretty much a
Right.
write-off,
Right.
and now it's understood that you go back to tuning into those people almost like babies and getting the connections going. And they do regenerate. So things that we ascribe to the infant brain are possible in injured adults. I'm hopeful. So
Right. No, yeah, you've probably seen some of those cool research they've done in some of those, stroke victims and people with Alzheimer's that, yeah, and it's like, oh, again, there's that attunement.
right. Well,
You know?
and with brain imaging, being able to actually
Well, measure, yeah.
apprehend
Yeah.
what's happening.
Absolutely, that's the cool thing, is, yeah, we can say, yes, we see some stuff there instead of just, it's wishful thinking, but now we know, hey, there's evidence to say different.
And
so.
I think corporations and a lot of the people who manipulate our lives are at fault for that. I mean, when I was young, you had to look a certain way or you were not pretty.
Oh, yeah, there's
And
messages and
and you had to
culture.
do things a certain way, and if you didn't do it like everybody else did, you weren't part of the team.
Mhm.
And that kind of bad programming, I think, sets up a lot of things in the brain.
Mhm.
And especially for children who, starting at a young age, they're brainwashed before they even know what the word means.
Oh, yeah, especially with
And
media
that's
hitting
us.
like crazy, yeah.
That's our generation.
Yeah.
I just have a general question. At what age is a person's personality and character set?
Right.
And then once that's kind of set, and say they have a character flaw, I was just talking to someone who's wanting to break up with his girlfriend because she's a chronic liar.
Mhm.
And he's held out the hope, because he's talked to her about it a lot, and she says she wants to change, but she kinda lies about that. So, in our discussions, he says the best I could see someone changing would be 10%.
Uh-huh.
And even if she changed 10%, that wouldn't be good enough. So, at what age are they set, and what's the possibility of them changing?
Right. Well, they're definitely, once you start into early adulthood, that's when you start to get more, things getting more concrete.
And what age do you call that?
That's a great question, because that's different with each person.
Okay.
And we're understanding that a little bit better.
I mean, I don't think we're 18, we're maybe late
Yeah,
20s.
yeah, right.
Okay.
That's what I would say. More like 24 is
Okay.
kind of what I would think,
Okay.
24, 25-ish. And then, this is what somebody told me years ago, and I think this is true in my experience, is, so if we take like a rock, okay, and let's say this person is a rock that has all sorts of sharp edges around them, right? If we throw them in the, in the river, good old mountain stream, not the Smoky Hill, right? If we throw it in a mountain stream, of doing therapy, doing some work and stuff like that, we're going to pull that rock out, and it's not going to look drastically different. It's going to have a similar shape, but some of those edges are going to be off a little bit. And in a lot of ways, that's our goal. And if we can get more than that, that's awesome. But I think that's a realistic goal for a lot of people. And of course, now with what we're saying with some of the brain stuff is, well, maybe we'll get a lump or two that's a little bit different. But that's kind of what I think about it anyway. Yes?
So I'm wondering about kind of the grief process portrayed in the movie. And it kind of reminded me of like breaking up with someone but still keeping them as friends on Facebook. So you're still like going back and checking old pictures and whatnot.
Yes.
What's your read on that type of grief process as opposed to the way that we do grief now, which is we don't have that person anymore?
Right. There's a couple different models of grief. So I tend to prescribe to the model of Warden, which is that we don't have phases, we have tasks. And so the first task of grieving is you have to acknowledge the loss, right? Of course. Second one is you have to experience the pain of the loss, which is, a tricky one for a lot of people. Third one is you have to figure out some of the roles and responsibilities that person did in your life. You have to kind of, figure those out for yourself or figure out other ways for those things to get met. And the fourth one is figuring out how to have a relationship with that person still. So the primes just throw a monkey wrench in that, because before it was like, oh, if I was playing golf, and I was like, oh, there's this hole. Boy, I remember Dad used to hate this hole. He'd always hit it into the water, and you'd have that kind of relationship still. But yeah, this totally throws a wrench in it in terms of what would that look like? And am I really having a relationship with that person? Or is it, you know, what am I relating to? That's the good question with that. So let me ask you a few questions. So first off, just what were your reactions, right? Go ahead and vent for a second. I mean, yeah.
One observation that I would make at looking at that, it seems like the artificial intelligence prime characters began, of course, obviously to reflect exactly what they were told, particularly by, in this case, the griever. But it seems to me to be a metaphor for how we also tell other people who we're about and are shaped by what they tell us. So it's that conversation. It's like we create our own world with the assistance of somebody else. One observation.
No, absolutely. That's exactly right. I'm glad somebody was going to say that, because that's really what where the rubber meets the road in that discussion I had earlier is all these relationships that we have, right? There's this process of accommodation and assimilation. You know, what do I take in from what they give me, and what do I say that's not me, right? And this me, not me, and what's them, and all that stuff is huge. And that's what's, playing out in this movie like crazy. Yeah.
One thing that I thought maybe would happen is that as they were talking to their prime, they would create a person or a relationship they wished they'd had. But I didn't see it. I don't think, except, were we looking at three primes talking to each other?
Yes. You were looking at three primes talking to each
That was awesome.
other.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, well, you know, where is he? Why haven't he? You know. The regular people could be here or not, you know, whatever. We've got each other. But yeah, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of transformation happening in a way that you'd hope. Yeah.
Why were there no other people?
Why were there?
They had no relationships of any sort.
Right.
What was the point of that?
What was the point of not having any?
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever watched a movie or been in a situation where I've seen a group of people that were so insular.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, layers and layers of buffers, right? I mean, we've got our own little system here, right? And then we've each are kind of buffered ourselves off. John, the very solicitous, I think is what Marjorie called him, right? I mean, he was engaged in everybody's lives and helping out, but he was very buffered, right? Even when Tess was really emotional and stuff, he was just very left brain about it. You know, he'd throw out a little thing here, but he was not very emotional. So all sorts of isolation and lack of attunement and relationship there. So great point. Oh, and one other thing I thought was interesting along those lines is, did you catch the part about the parrot? Yeah, it's like, yeah, he was the parrot, right? It's like, where are you as a person here? Right? You're just telling everybody, these primes and these people, real people in your life, where are you? Right? And where did that come from in your life? So
go on.
So here's the question. Could you relate to any of these characters? You don't have to say out loud and say, oh yeah, I've got issues like crazy. Let's talk about them. But,
no, I didn't relate to it at all.
Okay.
To me, it was too mental.
Too mental.
There was no real connection between, like you said, three primes talking. That's like a robot talking.
Well, that was
to a
just at
robot.
the end. That was just at the end. The last scene.
Well, yes, but it started with one as the characters
Right.
were introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And, you didn't know there were all three until the end. Had you known it sooner, you would have recognized
Well, they actually weren't all three
at the exact
at
moment.
the same time. Right. It was at the end when they were all dying. Or not all dying, but over time. Right.
The only survivors.
Yeah, the only survivors, yeah.
I had a strange triggering by the movie. As a very young person, like maybe first, second grade, I began to suspect that the great bulk of people around me weren't real.
Uh-huh.
And that they were some kind of automatons,
Yeah.
just sort of like set decorations to
Right.
give me a hard time. And so, I looked at that and thought, Boy, what a selfish child I must have been.
But you know, that's pretty, it's pretty normative in some ways, this kind of magical thinking that we get, and kind of that.
No, I mean, it was a really paranoid suspicion.
Oh, okay, you were actually paranoid about it?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Uh,
Gotcha, so yeah.
To
So-
be discussed later.
Yeah, to be discussed
Yeah, right.
later, exactly, but yeah.
In
Uh-huh.
Park City, right.
I got that feeling I get when when I am interacting with people virtually and not having any human connection. I got that same feeling for this movie. I just started feeling kind of depressed.
Yeah, well, exactly, because that's kind of what we're talking about at the beginning, is we
Clones and
gotta,
robotoids.
well, yeah, and we've gotta have that,
That's what they're-
that reaction with each other and that attunement, or otherwise, we're like the baby, then we don't have a physiological reaction, then we're kind of like, this isn't really doing anything for me.
Well, I think the exciting thing is gonna happen when somebody tells the prime, you may go now, and the prime says, no, I don't want to.
Right, exactly.
I got
Yeah,
you.
yeah, you can be
In
like,
control of
Marjorie
that.
Prime 2, you know, what's gonna happen next, yeah. So, do you get a sense of how any of the characters' early experiences may have shaped their psychology?
Sorry, I just want to, probably for the first question before
Oh,
I
sure.
forget it. The part where Marjorie said, perhaps, something like, perhaps I'm here so you can have the conversation that you needed to have before I was gone. That, in my mind, was sort of the meat of the
Correct.
story, because as we talk about in therapy, right, it's like, you can go through the grieving process by reconnecting with the person and by journaling with the person or praying to the person or talking to the person or however you want to, and through that process you're able to settle the things that may have been unsettled. And so I thought that was probably the meat of why human beings would ever pay for an AI or anything like that, to be able to, you know, get through it on their own.
Right.
In some way, so.
Yeah, and it was interesting, because didn't quite go there for any of them. It kind of gave us a little clue how it might go maybe with their dog selection, but. Yeah.
I was reading AARP this last month, and they had a thing in about people who lied. And this couple said that they had a 10-year-old that was lying, and they didn't know what to do. Nobody seems to know what to do with liars. And what this couple did
Don't vote for
is
them.
they lied, they decided they were going to keep lying to him about everything. Until finally he just, just finally gave up and went to him and said, okay, I won't lie anymore. But they're also finding that the children who are lying the most are the smartest ones.
Oh, they
So
could-
it
yeah,
was
they-
like you have to do something really specific to somebody if they lie to you time and again. And I just loved that parent saying that. I wish somebody told me this 50 years ago,
Right. You might have done that, right.
Yeah. we're-
Okay, so any else that you guys think played into?
I think that the death of that child affected everyone in the family.
Sure.
And I didn't know quite what his situation was. But did he commit suicide?
Mhm.
That's what, okay.
Yeah, he committed suicide and he killed the dog
Yeah.
at the same time or whatever before, so.
So
yeah.
was he really young when he made that choice?
You know, for the picture, I'd say, maybe 10, 11, something, I don't know. Is that what, did they say 10? Okay. Yeah, and she was 6 at the time.
Yeah.
That's
So-
why I thought that she was really affected by it, that she always felt she wasn't enough, that her mother was never the same and she couldn't make her better, and that she was a high achiever and everything, but she never felt she was.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and how did you see that playing out in her life?
Anger.
She was angry all the time, right? And was, I mean, everything she saw, I mean, and John said when he was talking to Tess Prime, is people think you're quiet, but you like to fight, or you're kind of confrontational, right? She saw everybody as a rival. Walter Prime's a rival. Julie, what is you doing over here? I mean, everybody. Dr. Ross is not doing, I mean, everything's a battle, right? And even, when she's trying to talk with Tess, or with Marjorie Prime, she couldn't have another sort of relationship with her. That was all that she could do. She liked, as I mentioned earlier, she liked her dog. She wanted it to be what? Clean, shy, and
Not barking.
not barking, right? And John wanted the exact opposite of that, right? He wanted a companion. What do we know about maybe Tessa's relationship with her dad? Any sense about that?
Well, it was only described as a remote.
Remote. What do you notice that, there's a great line there that says, pronouns are powerful.
Right.
What do we know about the way she talks about Walter? It's Walter.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm 40 years old and I still call my dad Dad. I mean, there was one time in the movie she calls him Dad. So that tells you a lot about that too. So we've got that going on with Dad, Mom and her, there just wasn't a whole lot of emotional room for her, to get what she needed.
Well, it seemed like John was sort of the glue holding everything together. I mean, he was the one staying up late with the Primes, Phil giving all the backstory. He was the one who talked, I think the only one who talked about Damien, which is why John Hamm's character then was able to tell the rest of them at the end, like,
Yeah.
oh, then they were like, Damien was, oh, I know now,
Yeah.
So it seems like he's sort of like the picker-upper, kind of keeping everything all together type of a.
Kind of middle child role.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
With alcohol.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, and was
Drinking.
definitely needing some substances to help him keep it together.
And Damien's name was never mentioned in the family after he died.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
the only one who
And-
mentioned the name.
Right.
And they say now when someone dies, you should speak the name and
Yeah.
talk about that person. And by not doing that, it affected a lot of lives.
Yeah, she couldn't even, Tess couldn't even tell Marjorie Prime about it.
No.
I mean, it's like, well, I guess 50 years of not saying anything, it's pretty, oops, looks like we're stuck. That's all right. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, even though Damien was never depicted in the film, except for that photograph, I mean, he very much was a living character.
Oh, yeah.
That just wasn't in the scene. And that kind of emotional weight was carried by all the actors in the film, I felt.
Absolutely. Yeah, a huge role in all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Yeah.
Put it up.
And I felt like the primes in many of the scenes were really metaphors for the original character talking to themselves and coping and dealing and rehashing and rethinking and remembering. And there
Right.
was one phrase that I liked in the film where they talked about what you're remembering is really the memory and not the actual event or person,
Right.
et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. The memory of the memory.
Right.
Yes, and that's a great point. Is and it's funny because I've had some couples fight just like they did, right? It was vanilla, no pistachio, right? I mean, that stuff. It's going to get blurred. Yeah.
At one time, there were people who were against daguerreotypes because you could see an image of someone once they had passed on, and it was thought to be unbalancing because it's our job to kind of remember,
Yeah.
and it's our job to have their memory die with us, too, in a sense. And so this idea that you have a person as some type of hologram or whatever, it seems to qualify as what I would call necromancy, quite definitely. And it seems like a pretty unstable territory to wander into.
Oh, yeah.
In many ways, in terms
Right.
of, what
Right.
will that do to the people who are not grieving in a normal manner?
Right. Yeah, because obviously, well, especially for John, I mean, Tess Prime was around for a long time. You get the sense. So.
With the memory loss.
Right, and all that kind of
I
stuff.
like the Mexican Day of the Dead.
Yeah,
They
smart,
celebrated
I see.
on
I
it.
think the really salient issue here is what diagnostic code and how do we bill for it?
And that is so true because that's the other tricky part is, as we go forward, in our very much microwave society and our efficiency, is the type of work we're talking about to really help these people cannot be done the way insurance wants us to do it.
And it'll be this.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's the problem is,
Right.
you know, we can't really
Maybe
do a
try
lot
the
of that
prime
stuff.
first.
Yeah, and so that's the sad part. Yeah, what do you think about this? Poor granddaughter, I mean, you know, we didn't even talk about Raina and her, you know, Tess not having a relationship with her, but what do you think that would be like? You know, again, it's like this idea of, well, anyway, I'll shut up and hear what you guys have to say. Any thoughts on that?
I think from birth, that was a reality available to people, so she did that, I guess.
Right, she wanted to, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have a comment too?
I'm not sure that confusing machines with people is healthy.
Yeah, right. Well, and yeah, I think that's the really tricky part is, especially when they're, you know, fed by other people. I mean, you know, it makes you wonder, am I really relating to this person, even if it was, I mean, you know, it's kind of a bastardization of who that person was. And we don't know exactly what we're relating to. And so, yeah, Tess Prime, that's never going to be grandma.
Well, what I find interesting is that nowadays, people are starting to do what they call death videos, where you actually get to hear the person talk about themselves and their life before they die. And a lot of people just never think they're gonna die, but I think it would be excellent, because a little camera didn't cost hardly anything. Set it in front, get a couple of lights on you, and you can keep a connection between you, the person speaking, and generations on
Right.
down the line, because saving film is not like it used to be.
Yeah.
You know, film doesn't have to be in a salt mine vault
Right.
anymore. It can be on a DVD, and these things last for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I felt a connection between John, like that's Tim Robbins' character, John and Tessa's granddaughter, because they're the only ones who are sort of outside the family who then came in, because she was adopted and he married in.
Uh-huh.
And so like the first time we even see her, he's sort of leading her up into the house, and it's kind of a half-formed thought, but I just thought that would probably be significant somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of also struck by the juxtaposition of like this isolated house, and yet, like, I mean, to me, ocean and nature is like life-giving and all this stuff, and it's like you're right there, but it's like sterile. I mean, there's no interaction. So yeah.
I was gonna say, I think with her meeting the grandmother Prime, I mean, the aim for what that interaction was would be the same, but it's a different delivery method. Because if she was asked, "Granddad, tell me about Grandmom," it's a different delivery method than him feeding it into an AI that can learn and use that information. So it's a different delivery method, but it's still the same aim with getting that information about her grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah. Take the new twist on Ancestry.com and all sorts of stuff. I mean,
Well, it was poignant at least that they discussed taxonomy.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty impressive. She knew what the heck that thing was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we go to Casablanca for the waters, it's probably healthy to, in part or largely, admit that we've been misinformed.
Yeah, there was a, gosh, can't remember the exact line in there that, yeah, I'll have to think more about that because I can't remember exactly, but.
Well, I think it's a line from the movie.
Right, it is,
It's a line.
but I was trying to remember the sequence about, and it's escaping me right now, but I remember having a reaction to it then too, but I can't remember what it was. But, yeah, there were so many nuggets in this thing. That was the cool thing about it.
In Casablanca, the female lead and the male lead were talking together, and about, you know, what she was saying, well, why did you come to Casablanca?
Right.
And he says, well, I was misinformed about it, you know,
Right.
being on the ocean.
Right, right. Anything else before we wrap it up? Yeah. Oh,
Well, I have
two
a
more.
question.
Yeah.
What was the interaction with the Bob Dylan song, I Shall Be Released? Was that the Prime that had tears when that song was playing, or?
No, that was actually Tess, And Marjorie Prime was the one who put that on for her to hear.
Okay, okay.
So then you could mess around with that as like, was that a misattunement between Tess, or Marjorie Prime and Tess? And that actually pushed her over the edge?
I don't know.
It's a whole lot of
Or
things.
was she trying to make a contact with her?
Right, exactly.
And make a,
Right,
bonding
but it was maybe a misattunement. Anyway, yeah, one last one.
Oh, I mean, I'm struck by the fact too that the granddaughter isn't really gonna meet Tess. She's gonna meet John's object representation
Right.
of Tess.
Yes.
So it's like, it's not even the real thing.
Yes, and as we talked about, right, is if our self,
Right.
is distorted, then other people's, so yeah, we're getting this other image that is not exactly the
No,
same. And so,
not true.
Even like studying history is like, well, it's the actual history of what happened there. Well, we're getting it through a couple people's lenses, yeah.
I'm disappointed that at the end, when you had the three primes talking out of their ignorance to each other, that the movie didn't end with Strawberry Fields Forever, where nothing is really.
You know what messed
Touche.
me up too is the whole time my fantasy was that the house was, first of all, I love that house. So let me just
Right,
get that out
yeah, the
there.
real estate envy was
Yeah.
bad.
Well, so the whole time I'm sitting and picturing this in Southern California, because I lived there for a while, in Malibu. And then when it snowed, I'm like, what this is like some other, what is going on here? That I
Cambridge Island,
I think I've come to realize maybe it was in Long Island or something, and it really wasn't that messed up. But all right, well, thank you guys so much. We'll have a celebration. Thank you.